You're watching The Journal here on DWTV. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin.
And I'm Ariana DeHoog with the business news. Welcome.
Here are the headlines this hour. A new sting for the Eurozone. Portugal rejects deep budget cuts. The Prime Minister resigns and warns that Lisbon is headed for a bailout. Coalition forces over Libya say that Gaddafi's air defenses are now destroyed. The new focus, Gaddafi's armor on the ground. And exposed to radioactivity, 2 workers at Japan's Fukushima power plant are hospitalized. Portugal's government in Lisbon is expected to collapse this Thursday, and it is all about the euro. On Wednesday, Prime Minister José Sócrates resigned after Parliament rejected his austerity plan. Sócrates maintains that Portugal will only be able to avoid a Eurozone bailout if it radically cuts spending. We begin our coverage with this report from Lisbon.
Interest rates on Portuguese bonds hit record levels in Thursday trading. 10-year yields rose to over 7.9%, while 5-year bonds were at more than 8%. José Sócrates' minority government failed to get its 4th austerity package through Parliament in a Wednesday night vote, triggering the Prime Minister's resignation and plunging the country further into crisis. But public opinion in Western Europe's poorest nation has stacked up against the government. Many here were afraid the cutbacks would drive Portugal into recession. But previous austerity packages did show some success. Portugal's budget deficit was 9.4% in 2009. Last year it dropped to 7.3%. The socialists hope to whittle it down to about 4.5% by the end of this year. There's now mounting concern that Portugal will follow Greece and Ireland in applying for the EU bailout fund.
Indeed, EU leaders are gathering in Brussels in the next coming hours for an EU summit, and it's all starting under a cloud. Jeff Mead is in Brussels covering the summit for us. Jeff, does the fiasco in Portugal, what we're seeing right now, does that throw this summit into disarray?
It does to a degree. There's going to be no instant change of agenda because of what's happened. And I can tell you, I've just been told in the last few minutes, in fact, that as far as protocol goes, the Prime Minister of Portugal, now the caretaker Prime Minister, cannot technically ask for a bailout because he's no longer in the Prime Ministerial seat. So there will be no formal discussion or offer of bailout or request for bailout. Of course, the subject will crop up.
Yeah.
And it is so ironic that on the brink of this summit, this should happen just when they want to discuss emerging from the economic crisis in Europe.
Exactly. Talk about bad timing here. What are you hearing there, Jeff? Do EU leaders expect Portugal to ask for a bailout?
They do in the long run, but it may take a new government in place before formally that can be done. As I say, right now, the Prime Minister, caretaker Prime Minister, will sit in his seat and observe and explain what possible ways out of the crisis that Portugal has now. But this is not for today. This will, of course, be discussed, but there will be no suggestion of a bailout. Portugal might need as much as 60 billion euros, and there is that money in the temporary emergency kitty, which was set up for Greece and Ireland and has already been used. But it will be on the table. It will be there like a black cloud over this summit. As I say, the summit is all about talking about we're emerging from the crisis. Well, it looks like we're not.
Okay, Jeff Mead there in Brussels for us. Jeff, thank you very much. While arguing her case, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel went before Parliament today to defend her government's stand on the Eurozone bailout fund. Proposals on strengthening the fund have been very controversial here in Germany, mainly because Germany would foot a large chunk of it.
The Chancellor's primary goal is to keep the European currency stable, but she also says that European countries who get into financial trouble and ask for aid should do more to put their budgets in order. She stressed that bailout funds should not be easy to get.
The new provisions take into account our recommendation that the rescue mechanism be used only when absolutely necessary to preserve the stability of the euro. It's the so-called last resort clause.
The opposition agrees with the proposals in principle, but says the government should have done more early on to shore up the euro.
Chancellor Merkel, you've been doing an amazing amount of tap dancing around this problem since the start of the Greek crisis. And when we then consider the show that you put on, that phrase from your government's policy statement, "We do what we say," rings hollow indeed.
The Chancellor disagrees and predicts that confidence in the euro will be restored this year.
All right, let's pick up on what the Chancellor had to say. Simon Young is at our parliamentary studio here in Berlin. You know, we heard from Jeff Mead, Simon, in Brussels that there's a black cloud over this EU summit taking place today. Portugal is in crisis. Do you think Merkel is as worried as other EU leaders seem to be?
Well, I think perhaps not. I think the fact that Portugal seems to be moving closer to needing the rescue fund, in a sense, plays into her hands. Of course, it makes the Brussels summit messy, but from the German point of view, it underlines their argument that what's needed is a strict regime. It's not about bailouts. It's about preventive measures and the threat of sanctions against countries that overspend and whose deficits grow too large. That's the German way of looking at it, and the Portuguese case just seems to back up that point of view.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, Simon, it sounds like you're saying Merkel's probably going to get her way in Brussels.
Well, she knows it's going to be a tough summit. Of course, there are lots of countries that fear that this planned pact for the euro is going to lead to a two-speed Europe, with some countries left out of important decisions that affect them. I think Merkel's main focus at this Brussels summit will be on ensuring that Germany doesn't have to stump up too much cash too quickly. She wants the German input into this new fund, 22 billion euros, to be spread over 5 years rather than the 3 as currently planned. And that's, I think, what she's going to be focusing on in Brussels at this summit.
All right, Simon Young reporting for us there at our parliamentary studios here in Berlin. Thank you very much, Simon. All right, Ariana's here with more on Lisbon in limbo.
That's back to you, Brent.
Thank you, Ariana. Well, we move now to Libya. Coalition forces say that Muammar Gaddafi's air defenses are now destroyed and that the focus has turned to Gaddafi's tanks and artillery. Heavy fighting is reported between Gaddafi's soldiers and the rebels in the cities of Misrata, Zintan, and Ajdabiya. Explosions were heard overnight in Tripoli as Allied air raids continued.
Worry, we know how to fight.
These rebels near Ajdabiya are apparently holding their ground. They're facing the government's heavily armed forces with their own light weaponry.
I have only TNT.
What is this?
TNT. This is TNT. I bomb. It's a bomb. I made it by myself. And I have a small gun. I have RPG. Even the RPG, I cannot reach them. I made it as well. TNT inside.
Rebel forces have been pinned down after more than 3 days of trying to recapture Ajdabiya from Gaddafi's forces. The town is 160 kilometers from the rebel stronghold Benghazi. Meanwhile, the international coalition is keeping up its airstrikes. Libyan officials say a military base in Tripoli was destroyed overnight. And for the first time, Libyan state television showed footage of corpses people government officials say were killed in the airstrikes. None of these images can be independently verified.
Well, the confrontations appear to be escalating in Syria. Reports from the southern city of Daraa say that more than 20,000 people have turned out for the funerals of 9 anti-government protesters. Another report says the bodies of at least 25 people have been taken to the main hospital there. The victims are reportedly demonstrators who were killed in clashes with security forces on Wednesday afternoon. There have been protests in Daraa for the past several days. Demonstrators there are calling for an end to corruption and one-party rule. In Japan, 3 workers at the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant have been exposed to radioactive material. Officials say that 2 of the people have been hospitalized. They were hurt while laying electrical cables at the plant, where workers are still trying to cool 6 nuclear reactors. In Tokyo, meanwhile, radiation fears led to a run on bottled water after the city said its tap water is unsafe for infants. That warning has since been lifted, but there are now similar fears in a district outside the capital.